Okay, I just wanted to put together a quick video on some of the concepts from chapter 3 in your Daniels text. It's a short chapter itself. This presentation doesn't have to be long, but I think you need to understand some of these markers, especially when it comes to running and performance. There's one take-home message. Okay? The take-home message: in the world of endurance sports, VO2 max is not the be-all end-all marker of human performance. And I think we tend to forget this, especially like when you're working as an exercise science student, when you're taught how important VO2 max is. It is incredibly important within endurance sports, and it is one marker of endurance performance and overall cardiovascular health. However, with regards to performance, there's much more that goes into it, right? For endurance sports, the be-all end-all is how you finish the race. Do you finish with the fastest time, right? And that kind of brings me back to like what we talked about in chapter 2, your VDOT, your velocity, right, at your VO2 max is more important than your actual VO2 max, because if you have a faster velocity at your VO2 max, you will finish a race faster, assuming things like transitions work. Okay, so VO2 max, not the be-all end-all. There's much more to it. There's also the psychological component. If you guys explored those fatigue models by Lorson and Abyss et al., you would have seen there's much more to performance than just VO2 max. So the running variables, there's a few running variables that they start to introduce in this chapter. One is just heart rate in training. So generally speaking, and I've brought this up already, your heart rate in training should improve. And this is a sign of improved running economy, in that if you go out and you train tomorrow at 9-minute mile pace, so you go out for 30 minutes and you run at 9-minute mile pace, you have an average heart rate of 150 beats per minute. All things being equal, all conditions being equal, 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, you would hope that that average heart rate at the same exact pace is lower. Maybe it's 145, maybe it's 142 beats per minute. Okay? Now, the next thing is that heart rate is going to fluctuate based on conditions tremendously. So the easiest example would be in the heat, right? So, if you're writing your programming for an athlete, we always assume basic conditions of like normal, 60, 65 degrees. But your heart rate will be elevated in higher temperatures. So if you ever program based on heart rate and it ends up being like 90 degrees outside, 95 degrees outside, and I've had clients do this where they tell me like, oh, I programmed 10-minute miles, and they said their heart rate just went through the roof and they could only run like 11-minute miles. Okay, so factoring in weather conditions is very important. Other conditions and variables, or condition variables that matter, are the terrain, right? So if your athlete normally does their Sunday long run on a flat path, that's kind of just an out and back, they might have an average heart rate, as expected. But if their Sunday long run ends up being on this very hilly terrain, right, either one of two things will happen. Either their heart rate's going to be much, much higher if they try to maintain the same pace, or they have to go at a much slower pace to hit a target heart rate instead. Okay? Maximum heart rate. If you're ever programming training based on what some people do is a percentage of your heart rate reserve or percentage of your heart rate maximum, you can do either. You have to determine your maximum heart rate because it really is highly variable. The whole 220 minus your age thing, that's an okay guideline, but I could tell you it could differ 20 to 30 beats in either direction. Right, your max heart rate could be 15 beats under that. It could be 15 beats over. It just depends on the individual. So I think you have to truly find your maximum heart rate. And I think the Daniels text offered a scenario where they offered, I think it was 3, like warm up and then do 3 maximum hill sprints. Do your first, run up a hill like about 200 meters, recover, come back down, run up 200 meters, see whatever your heart rate, the highest heart rate recorded value, and that's pretty damn close to your maximum heart rate. So if you're programming based on heart rate, you have to find out what it is, the maximum heart rate. Resting heart rate. Resting heart rate is a strong marker of fitness. Just like training heart rate, resting heart rate is a strong marker, and you guys should know why now, right? We talked about under resting conditions, and endurance athletes' resting heart rate should decrease over time. That is a chronic adaptation to training. Well, why does this happen? You guys know, right? What happens is our heart becomes much more forceful. It becomes more powerful. We can get a larger stretch with our heart. As our heart becomes more powerful and pumps more blood per beat, it doesn't need to beat as frequently, right? So if it doesn't need to beat as frequently, you're gonna have a lower resting heart rate. So that's why you'll see endurance athletes have these resting heart rates in the 40s, sometimes in the 30s. And I already said you have to be careful. It is possible to have too low of a resting heart rate. However, that is a very rare occurrence. Okay, so VO2 max, all right? I've thrown the term VO2 max out a lot. I've even kind of defined it as the maximum amount of O2 we can consume for exercise. But I haven't really given you many examples, right? So typically, or almost always, we express VO2 max as a relative number. All of you guys have probably done a VO2 max test or seen one in exercise physiology at this point, or done a test with Dr. Dunbar. And an example might be like this number right here. So a VO2 max is listed at 70 milliliters per minute per kilogram of body weight. That first number, generally speaking, is considered fairly high for a VO2 max score. You guys should be somewhat familiar with what a VO2 max score should look like. So if you guys are putting together a program on a fictitious character that has a VO2 max score of 120 or 105, well, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, that's not accurate because no one on earth has ever recorded that, right? I think off the top of my head, the highest ever recorded VO2 max score is 89. Not positive, but I think that. And I bring this up because you guys know I teach at Mercy, and someone was writing a training program for someone at Mercy, and they said their VO2 max score was like an 80 or 85. I think it was like 85 actually, and it was for like some college athlete. And I was on a panel grading the project, and I said to the other professor, I said, well, unless this person is nearly breaking world records, this probably isn't accurate. Right, so you guys have to come in with a reasonable VO2 max, right? So what's more reasonable? For a college trained distance runner, maybe something in the neighborhood of 50 to 60. If you're talking about someone who's going to like win NCAAs in cross country, then 70 might be a little bit more reasonable. 70, 75. I mean, the runner who wins NCAA cross country nationals, usually for college, is probably one of the better runners in the world, so that'd be a little bit more reasonable. But again, it really just depends on your athlete and their actual ability. If you come in and tell me you've got a complete beginner and they've got a VO2 max of 70 or 65, I'm going to say that's probably not realistic, and you need to just adjust that. And you guys should also see what average VO2 max scores are when you guys submit your labs, right? So when you submit your labs, which you're doing, I think 2 days now, what I'll do is I won't put any names, but I'll publish everyone's VO2 max score. So you guys can see like the average VO2 max score within the class. And you guys will see, usually, if it's a class that doesn't really engage in cardiovascular activity, the VO2 max scores are pretty low. On average, when I do the beep test in class, because I'm usually there with you guys doing it, and I actually usually do it with you guys, like the average student score is something like 26, 27, something along those lines. You'll have some students who get a VO2 max of like 15. It really just depends on the population of the class, the diversity of the class. Absolute VO2. So An astute student or coach should start to realize that, well, if VO2 max is a strong indicator, right? I said it's not the be all end all, but it is a strong indicator. How can we increase VO2 max? Well, VO2 max is a relative number. There's one of two ways. You can either increase the amount of oxygen you're consuming, so increase your VO2, or you can decrease your body weight. So what a lot of coaches will start to recommend at the college and professional level is that some athletes need to slim down a little bit. We have to be very careful with our recommendations that we don't start to develop some type of eating disorder or anything along those lines. But by simply losing 3, 4, 7, 10 pounds, oftentimes that can improve an overall VO2 max score. Now, we've got to be very careful with this, and that's what Daniel starts to point out. If we start to lose body weight at the expense of muscle, that can start to affect our velocity at VO2 max. So you might be cheating the system in that your VO2 max might actually go up, right? Maybe it goes up a point or two, but your velocity at VO2 max might actually decrease because you've lost some muscle. Okay, so we have to be careful with our recommendations. There's certain situations where just decreasing body weight are appropriate. You know, like I can tell you, case in point, if somebody's got a BMI of like 32, they probably can just increase their VO2 max by losing body weight. But if somebody's got a VO2 max of like 20, right, 21, 19, 18, whatever it is, you probably shouldn't be suggesting that they lose body weight. And finally, the definition of running economy is the measure of energy expenditure while running at a given speed, right? So I've already said this a few times. Running economy is very important. As we become more efficient or more economical as an athlete, whether it's swimmer or cyclist, right, we can utilize less energy at the same running speed. So it's the same thing as our heart. Our heart beats less frequently at the same running velocity, right? So it's the same exact concept. Okay, so this last graphic is really just to re-illustrate my main point in that VO2 max is not the be-all, end-all. So think about, if you've done it, when you took a VO2 max test, what happened, right? So you probably did a graded exercise test where you started at a certain speed and grade, and then after 3 minutes it increased, after 3 minutes it increased, after 3 minutes it increased, all the while you're breathing into a mask and it's measuring how much oxygen you consumed. At some point during the test, there's a plateau, right? Just like these 4 red dots right here. There's a plateau in the amount of oxygen you're consuming, and that is your VO2 max. But at the end of the test, think about what happened. So once we reached that plateau, what happened? Did you collapse to the floor in complete exhaustion? No. You know, you usually will not have even went to exhaustion. We'll stop the test. We'll click stop on the treadmill, and then you'll do some sort of cool down. My point is that at your VO2 max, you can continue running. You can continue cycling. You can continue swimming, right? It is not the marker of complete exhaustion, right? So you could also increase the speed, right? So we can increase the speed even though we've already hit our VO2 max. It just means we're not going to continue to consume a higher amount of oxygen. If we increase the speed, we'll probably get to exhaustion earlier than if we kept the speed the same, right? But you can continue exercising. And what you'll see, right, these are really those markers of performance, is that certain people, if they exercise at VO2 max, will be able to exercise longer than others. Certain people might be able to continue exercising and running and training for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes at their VO2 max, while others might only be able to exercise for 1 minute, 2 minutes at their VO2 max. And that's another form of running economy, in that they can continue exercising past their VO2 max for a longer period of time. Okay, to put this another way, if you look in the Daniels text, there's a graphic where he looks at 3 different female collegiate athletes. The female collegiate athletes had 3 different VO2 max scores. One had a VO2 max of about 71, another one about 69, and then there was another one that was 65 or 66. And the interesting thing about this is they all had the exact same time in the 3K, right? So that alone should show you that way more goes into performance than just some VO2 max score. Okay? That is it for this. Hopefully this was helpful in you kind of understanding the various variables that go into training.